Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, first-time guest. Very, very happy to have him on. Member of the BlueWire podcast family, as well as a fellow Substacker. The Substack is called BuzzBeat Plus, and of course the pod, the BuzzBeat Pod on again the BlueWire Podcast Network. Richie Randal, what's going on, my man? How are you?
Not much. Just enjoying life. I'm a teacher, so we just got school started the other week. So it's been a hectic about 10 days here. I'm enjoying my class so far, but ready to talk some Knicks, some Hornets, and anything in between.
I went back today. I am also a teacher.
What grade?
This year I'm teaching 10th, 11th, and 12th grade.
Wow, I couldn't do that.
What do you teach?
I'm a third grade teacher, so I teach all the subjects. Well, yeah, you probably think the same for me. So, but.
Yes, I do. Everybody has their sweet spot. I found mine, and it sounds like you found yours.
Yeah.
Well, teaching is not for everybody, and rooting for mediocre basketball teams is also not for everybody. But we do what we have to do here. Let's start there. So the Hornets, I feel like from afar, they have been dinged with the were you guys awake for this offseason label. Do you think that that's fair? And if it's not fair, do you want to, I guess, tell us why?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Hornets are probably one of the least active teams here in the offseason, and not much has happened other than maybe the re-signing of Cody Martin. But I will say that the Miles Bridges situation is really the biggest hang-up. And, the Hornets were hoping that they could get this guy signed to a long year, extension, a deal. But because of that whole situation, they're kind of waiting on that legal process to play out. I guess he's technically still on the roster with that qualifying offer at the restricted free agent. So, anyone could, put out an offer sheet for him to sign, but no one's going to do that until that plays out. I don't think that when it's all said and done, that he'll be back with the Hornets. I just think it's a due process thing. I think the league and Charlotte are going to have to wait things out before any kind of suspensions come out. But considering all the evidence that we saw, I personally don't think he'll be on the basketball court anytime soon, if at all. So it sucks that that's the way that it happened, because they were banking on him, considering how much he improved last season over the past couple of seasons. He was a key piece, like right behind LaMelo Ball. So I think because of that situation and because he's still on the books, technically speaking, they have not been very active. And until that is sorted out, I guess they'll have to wait to make some trades. But obviously, they were not very active in free agency either. So I don't want to give them a pass by any means, but I do kind of understand from that point of view in terms of letting that situation play out.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, the timing of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was essentially right on, like almost literally on the eve of free agency, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So, you kind of answered this, but I'll ask it anyway, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Is it fair to say, or rather, do you think that they've been waiting for the legal process to play out before doing their next move, or doing a move? Or do you think it's just that there is no obvious move that they or worthy move that they have deemed like, okay, this is a good pivot for us, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, it's probably somewhere in between. I think there probably are some moves out there that they can make that don't involve Miles Bridges that they could kind of use to improve their team. But I do think it's kind of, I guess, silly to think that he will be back. But by the same token, they always say, innocent until proven guilty, let's keep him on the books type of thing. And I guess there's like a small hope that I think that they're thinking that he maybe will be kind of hit with a small suspension. But, in the eyes of many people here in Charlotte, they just, regardless of what the outcome is in the court system and then the legal system and the NBA system, a lot of people just don't want to see him anywhere near the basketball court. So there are moves that they can make. Trading Miles Bridges is obviously going to be very difficult, but there's other outside moves that they can make. But I think free agency was really just their plans were to re-sign this guy, maybe get one or two other players, but I think free agency, obviously it's at this point where there's like not anyone left. They still have to figure out their backup point guard situation. But other than that, there's still some moves that they can make. I think a lot of people are frustrated by the lack of moves. I can't imagine another team having less transactions than the Hornets.
Well, the Knicks didn't make a transaction that a lot of people expected them to make last week, although they did do their fair share of stuff earlier in the summer. And of course, they did extend RJ Barrett, which we've been talking about a lot on the pod over the last week and everything that goes with that. Obviously, so the reason we are having you on is to try to talk a little bit of potential trade, because I feel like since, and Andrew's here, he can correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like the first time we brought up the notion of like, hey, maybe we could send Julius Randle to the Hornets, was brought up before even the end of the season. Andrew, is that fair to say?
To an extent. We have an off-season series, Richie, called Cap or No Cap, where we go through a plan from our capologist and genius Jeremy every Sunday. And the very first episode of our off-season plan,
that's right,
was a consolidation of assets. And the first asset consolidation was sending Julius to Charlotte. And here we are 3-4 months later. And that is still an option we're exploring with you. If Leon Rose decides not to explore it, we'll at least explore it for him.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, we have to help him out. It's the least we could do. And, I will readily admit this, and I have readily admitted this, on a couple other pods we've done of this nature, where it's like, hey, might your team be interested in Julius Randle? It's like the type of team that I've always thought might be interested is, so let's just be frank, the sort of team that the Knicks are, which is that kind of middle of the road, slightly below middle of the road team that it's like, hey, let's take a risk. The big difference being Charlotte, not traditionally a free agent destination, although, not like the Knicks have been a big free agent destination either over the long stretch of time that we have here. But like, that's the thinking, and it's, I don't want to come off like, hey, take our crap, but it's almost like, might there be a level of interest in terms of the upside is worth it? Just before we even talk about Randall specifically, like what do the Hornets want to, like, what do they want to accomplish next year? Do you get the sense that there's like a 2, 3, 4, 5-year plan there? Is it very much year to year? Like where are you guys at as a basketball team?
Yeah, it's difficult because a couple of years ago when they acquired Gordon Hayward, I thought it was a good acquisition, but it also kind of sped up the process of like their rebuild that they were going for. It was the same year that they drafted LaMelo Ball, and LaMelo Ball obviously had an awesome rookie season, had an awesome season last season, making it to the All-Star game. So they've been kind of wearing like two shoes at the same time in terms of trying to rebuild and compete at the same time. And they've kind of fell right in the middle. And I do think the acquisition of Gordon Hayward kind of sped up the process. And it's been a blessing and just, a blessing and a curse at the same time, because, with Gordon Hayward, he kind of brings that steady presence to a team. When he's been healthy, obviously he's only like averaged 50 games per season when he's been here in Charlotte. The team has been good. The team has been good when he's been on the court, but the curse being like his injuries have coincided with like this end of season spiral in both seasons, right? Like they barely made it into the play-in, and then both of those play-in games, they got pretty much blown out. And, they've done a fairly good job with developing their own players with PJ Washington and Cody Martin and Jalen McDaniels to a certain extent, and obviously LaMelo Ball. But it just feels like they have been just enough competitive to get into the playoffs and the play-in, but obviously not good enough to make it, to a first round, second round matchup. So it's hard to really tell what their plan is. And then obviously this Miles Bridges situation, which I've talked about, kind of throws a wrench in the plans and stuff like that. So I think their plan, hopefully, knowing what their situation is to almost like to kind of take a gap year, slow things down a little bit, see what they can do this year. It probably is not going to result in a playoff appearance, and then go from there, because LaMelo Ball is due for an extension, I think, next offseason. So
it's funny. Andrew had a very nice rant on a pod that we recorded last night in which he was basically like, speaking to Knicks management, because I'm sure they listen to this, religiously. He's like, stop with the half measures. And hearing you say the plan is to take a gap year, I feel like half measures, gap year, it's like, 6 of one, half dozen the other. But at the same time, like where the Knicks are at, like there's not really a whole lot of choice right now. They didn't get Donovan Mitchell. They have, a bunch of young players, but at the same, they're not bad enough to engage in a tank unless something goes really wrong. It feels like you guys are kind of in the same boat, especially since, and like, I don't know if you think about this a lot too. There's and now with Utah joining the tankers, there is like a very clear group at the bottom who's gunning for that, the Victor Wembanyama spot. That it's like, if you're a team like the Hornets or a team like the Knicks, it's like, well, what do you like? Is it worth? Like, how does one even try to get into that group? It's like, I don't know. I don't think there's any easy answers.
Well, I also think too, like you've got to prove to LaMelo that this team is headed in the right direction. So you can't really just take a 180 all of a sudden.
Is that already a thing? Proving to LaMelo?
There are some people that just think that LaMelo is like got 1 foot out the door.
Really?
It's hard. I mean, I think there's a lot of people on Twitter that are Hornets fans, and there's a lot of people on Twitter that are LaMelo fans, and they only look out for LaMelo's best interest. And you just hear all these rumors, and you just never know where they're coming from. Everyone says it's coming from LaMelo's camp, but there is a part of this like building this organization, not to appease LaMelo, but also to kind of show him that they're headed in the right direction. So there is a little bit of that.
I mean, we did for shout out to our all of our patrons who are listening. We did our trade value rankings, and I had LaMelo. I'm just looking up right now. I had him 13th. I think I might have had him a little low. I remember when I was talking about him, like 13 feels a little low. He feels like he could be in the top 10. Just in terms, not 13th best player in the league, but like in terms of like asset, age, contract situation, the whole thing. So like, I get it, but would like Michael Jordan, like you got to figure he's not going to like, if there is an inkling that LaMelo wants out, he's going to try to do everything to appease him. Right.
Yeah, I would think so. But again, it's so hard to tell because all these like rumors and talks that are going on, you just never know who they're coming from. And obviously like LaMelo, you kind of associate him with the West Coast and stuff like that. And everyone says, oh, he's going to the Lakers, going to LA type of deal. It's hard for me to believe. And obviously the Hornets do have kind of a leg up in terms of being able to offer him that rookie extension in 2020. Sure. So yeah, I just don't think that they can take a complete 180 and just get off of everything type of deal. So they do have to show some kind of promise moving forward. Okay.
So good transition. What's the starting lineup right now? So let's, as you've said a few times, let's assume that Miles Bridges is not going to be part of the basketball team. Like what's the starting five?
LaMelo at point guard. Is that a shock?
I don't know, man. Who is the backup point guard right now? I don't even know.
The Hornets don't have a backup point guard. They play Terry Rozier.
That's a problem.
They played Terry Rozier as some backup point guard minutes, which he was all right with. But Ish Smith, they played backup point guard last year.
That's right. Yeah.
But they technically don't have a backup point guard right now.
Clyde Frazier's favorite player of all time, by the way. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that.
You really? Oh, no. Man. Yeah. Clyde Frazier, every time, no matter what team he's on, when the Knicks are playing, whatever team Ish Smith happens to, be employed by that year, he cannot stop talking about Ish Smith and how much he loves Ish Smith.
So, yeah, it would be LaMelo at the 1, Rozier at the 2, Hayward, obviously, if he's healthy, which, you can bank on being, healthy at the beginning of the season at the 3. And then you've got PJ Washington at the 4. And I would say Mason Plumlee at the 5. They drafted Mark Williams, but I just don't think that Mark Williams is going to be ready to start day 1. So, yeah, I think the starting 5 is pretty much, I wouldn't say set in stone, but I think it's pretty much a consensus among people how it's going to start at least. So.
And PJ Washington is a guy who is extension eligible this summer. Have there been any discussions as far as extending him or no?
Not that I've heard of, but
okay.
I think now that Miles Bridges could be out of the picture, like this is just like the next guy up that I feel like is a young player, versatile, two-way big that has shown Like he can guard multiple positions. I think he's got a lot of promise. Obviously, he's not proven it as much as Bridges, but he's definitely shown that ability on both sides of the court. But yeah, I think it would be smart to kind of extend this guy this offseason instead of waiting for restricted free agency next offseason.
And yeah, and we should say guys of Miles Bridges guys of PJ Washington's caliber don't typically get extended until you're getting much closer to the start of the season and the extension deadline. I mean, there's always exceptions like Keldon Johnson, but even I wouldn't expect PJ to be quite in Kellen's territory in terms of annual money. So that's interesting to me because like I've looked at PJ before because I'm always trying to construct fake trades and this and that. And is there a comfort level, do you think, there with playing him at the 4, with having him play 30 minutes at the 4 a night? Because I know he spent a lot of time at the 5 also his last 2 years, especially.
Yeah, he's definitely played a combination of both the 4 and the 5. I think where he excels offensively is probably better suited to be at the 5, just because he can be that pick and pop big that can kind of stretch the defense and pull away that center from the rim and kind of attack him off the dribble. I think sometimes, when he's on defense, he's very versatile. Like you see him guard guards and wings out on the perimeter. Yeah. For extended periods of time, but he gets in trouble a little bit when he has to go and bang and bruise with some of the bigger players. I actually would like to see him play more at the 4 than the 5. Just use him in the situational, like end of game type of situations, small ball 5 type of things where they can be very versatile on both ends of the court. But I think in his first season, he almost played too much at the 5. And I just feel like they need to dial that back a little bit. And I think obviously with, the acquisition, the drafting of Mark Williams, they've got Kai Jones waiting in the wings as well. Maybe they can kind of pinpoint PJ Washington at the 4 a little bit more. And now that Miles is out of the equation, there's more minutes at the 4 to be had.
So I think I've put it off long enough. So Julius Randle, he's a player, basketball player. Currently plays for the New York Knicks. I made my case on our most recent pod why the Knicks need to basically do everything they can to try to offload his contract. My understanding is they are at least talking to teams. I heard something today that I'm pretty sure I believe that Charlotte is one of those teams. Makes sense on some levels. Do you think that there was a world where the Hornets might be interested in Julius Randle?
Well, I'll first give my personal thoughts on Randall, and I've heard
because I have.
I've heard a couple of your pods, John. I know how you feel about him. You are not the highest on Randall, but I'm pretty lukewarm on him in terms of a couple of things. Just playing for the Hornets fit wise, but I'm just not entirely sold on him as a player. The system that the Hornets do run is predicated on ball movement, quick passes. They don't want the ball to stick too much. I think that a couple years ago when he was shooting the ball like lights out from deep, I think that is where he can be unlocked a little bit more as like an underrated passer. But I feel like he does have some ball stopper tendencies in my view. I haven't watched him as much as you, but
be happy about that.
Yeah, I think for the most part, like that, 2 seasons ago when he shot from behind the arc at a pretty well clip, I think that was more of an anomaly more than anything. I think when you look at his career from the 3-point range, it's kind of like that low 30s range. So if I could guarantee that he would shoot as well as he did 2 seasons ago, maybe I'd consider it more. But I do like his handle, his rebounding on both ends. I like his size. Being able to get to the rim through bully ball. Like those are some things that I do, and like from his game, but you really can't call him anything, other than like average defender, below average defender. And also what does he do when he doesn't have the ball in his hands?
Well, that's
the biggest thing. I mean, I don't know if you can speak to that because
I can't, because there's no good answer.
Okay. Because that to me just doesn't fit within the system of what the Hornets are doing. I know that Borrego is gone at this point, but I just feel like that offense, even though they've transitioned over to Clifford, that's going to be a mainstay with this offense in terms of just moving the ball. And yeah, go ahead.
And I just because you just said Clifford, is there another head coach in the league that Tom Thibodeau is closer with than Steve Clifford? So I'm sure those two would have a conversation, if this was a thing that might happen.
Yeah, let me ask you a question real quick with Randall, because obviously the contract is obviously unappealing too. Having 4 more seasons, is it more about the contract or is it more about the player for you, or both? I mean, I know it's probably both, but if you had to choose.
So it's interesting because we've talked a lot about it this summer about how there is a world at some point in which the Knicks would do well to have cap space. That world as of now, especially with the RJ extension, is probably not going to be here until 2025, which is 3 years away. So yes, technically Randall is still, or he actually has a player option for that year. I'm not really worried about that. To me, it's about the player. And honestly, people call me a hater for going this road, but I don't know how you watch last season and go any other direction. It's about the person and the personality and the fit in a locker room that just seems to have a lot of positivity otherwise. And he was very much, from an outsider's perspective, and I'm not in the locker room, kind of a black cloud over a lot of otherwise, good stuff. And there was other bad stuff going on last year. The Thibodeau did not do a good job managing the personalities in the locker room. He did a terrible job with the Kemba thing off the bat because he didn't want Kemba. It's just, I think the two sides need to move in a different direction. But it really, it starts and ends with the basketball fit, and everything you just said makes total sense. I guess the one thing, if I'm the Hornets, that I think I would at least, I could talk myself into, is I do think there is a world where he is like a 35, 36, 37% 3-point shooter on a consistent basis. Because I know last year it was not that, but I think the real number it's not 41, but right. I think it's somewhere in between. So but at the same time, he does really kind of need to be the 5 on offense. And then it turns to like, okay, well, great. You got PJ Washington. PJ Washington can shoot, because like, even though Randall can shoot, we all know where he wants to be. He wants to be down doing his thing, 16, 18 feet from the basket and being able to maneuver from there to the hoop. But then you have your defensive questions, and it's like, how much would the Hornets trust PJ at the 5 defensively? And I guess that's a question for you.
Yeah, like I kind of spoke to it earlier. I guess it just depends on the 5. Like if the 5 is not so much a bruiser, because PJ is not necessarily like a rim protector. Like he's no Mitchell Robinson, right? Like, I mean, not many people are, but he'll get his occasional weak side block, but he's more of just like a competitive guy that's out on the perimeter that can defend down low on the occasion. But he's not, erasing shots at a high level. So that could be an issue if you pair those two together. I just think from the Hornets point of view, I do have a couple of fake trades here that I would throw your way, but I think
please.
But I think from the Hornets perspective, it's hard to justify trying to trade for Randall, because I think what the Hornets are trying to do, again, they're trying to wear 2 shoes at the same time, but they're also trying to get off long-term money. And they already have Hayward for this year and next year, and they've got Rozier for 4 more years. So I do have a trade, John, but this doesn't necessarily get you guys off money. It doesn't necessarily get us off of money, but it could be the player for player swap that you could be interested in if you think it's a personality thing, or if you think it's something within the locker room. So Rozier's got 4 more years left at $96 million total.
Oh boy.
Well, Randall is 4 years. What is it? Close to 120, something like that.
It's so after the league year turned, his likely incentives transformed into unlikely because the Knicks didn't make the. It's like magic, because the Knicks didn't make the playoffs, and Julius Randle. I forget what the other one was. I think it's All-Star or All-NBA or so whatever. Something he did not qualify for. So as of now, it is 4 for I believe 106. So yeah. Okay. So, you're saving $10 million if you want to look at it that way over the course. So I don't know how important that is to New York. It could be somewhat important to Charlotte. So let's say Charlotte throws you Terry Rozier, and then this 2023 second round pick from Utah, which is obviously just going to be a late first, right? So you get Rozier and a late first, AKA early second from Utah. You send Julius Randle to Charlotte, and then like a lottery protected first round pick. And the only reason I'm saying that the Charlotte would get the better asset of like the trade in terms of the draft pick is because I think Rozier
is the better player today. And obviously his contract is less annually, but it doesn't necessarily solve Hornets getting off long-term money. And it doesn't necessarily get, the Knicks off long-term money. Does that even kind of whet your appetite at all, getting Rozier?
Listen, you could trade me a bag of old shoes and it whets my appetite. Yes, no, I'm killing Andrew. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Andrew. Anything you want to chime in? No, Andrew just go laugh in the background. Shout out to our YouTube channel.
Oh man,
watching this. It would absolutely interest me. And I just, to be completely transparent, I have a newsletter coming out on the same day that this pod will air. And I even said it on the pod. Like, I would give up a lot of one of the protected picks that they have to get off Randall. I think Rozier. At this point, I feel like Rozier has been through the take cycle so many times. He's just kind of a good player at this point. Like, I feel like there was, maybe not last season, or maybe it was one of the last 2 seasons. Wasn't there some like very, very, very fringe all-star buzz around Rozier?
I think it might have been 2 seasons ago, but
it was 2 years. Okay.
Last year, there were points during last season where he was like up and down, but like, he's still a great movement shooter, creates gravity just coming off screens. I feel like him and Brunson can pair well together, with Brunson kind of working the middle of the court and drawing attention in that way. And then obviously Rozier working on the outside. So again, it's not something that like I'd be like totally in love with, because the Hornets would not be getting off money. They'd actually be, getting money, but they could gain a first round pick in that situation. So do you think that Rozier, I think I know the answer. Do you think Rozier is the better player than Julius Randle? They're very different players, obviously.
They are. And it's like, and I think that's why there's a lot of people in New York who think that I'm crazy. And I don't think that they're necessarily crazy, because that's the thing, is like, Julius Randle can do some things with the ball in his hands that like are kind of, when he's not in the space that he was last year, like, he does have real on-ball skills that Terry Rozier has never showed in his career. And I think there is also a track record of Julius Randle, again, when he's playing the 5 on offense, or when he's alongside a stretch 5 on offense. Either one, doesn't matter. 6 of one, half dozen the other. So like, he's certainly the better fit for the Knicks, and on the Knicks, he would look like the better player and be the more useful player. And like, I know that there's been a lot of talk over the years about how good is Terry Rozier on defense, because there were some years for a while there, it was like, oh, he's really good. And then it was like, he's overrated. And now it's kind of like, but he competes, right? On the defensive end.
Yeah. And I think one of the more underrated aspects of him on the defensive side of the court is not necessarily the on-ball stuff, but he has a knack for kind of shooting the gap as an off-ball.
That's like RJ.
Yeah. So that's something that I think gets overlooked, because I think a lot of people are down on Rozier on the defensive side of the court, and they just view this guy as a shooter, as a bomber from deep. But that is something that you can kind of point to if you watch the Hornets enough to know that he's actually fairly decent with that. So, but yeah, overall defensively, I wouldn't call him like a net positive, but he does compete, like you said, John.
Yeah. And I think that's I don't want to tag Evan Fournier with the he doesn't compete label, because I do think he like tries. He's just, there were just so many games last season where you would just be watching, and it didn't matter what the numbers were after the game. You would just, as you'd watch the game, and you'd be like, this person is not, he's taking so much more off the table than he's putting on the table. I'm just looking at last year, Evan Fournier effective field goal percentage 54.1. Terry Rozier effective field goal percentage 53.9. So not terribly dissimilar offensive players, I don't think. Obviously, I think Rozier on the ball is gives you a little bit more juice. Whereas Fournier, I've said it a bunch of times, he hit more threes than anybody in the league after January 1st. So, but yeah, I think Tibbs would. I think the Knicks would do something like this. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, again, I don't know if I'm like overly sold on it, just for the fact that I'm not overly sold on Julius Randle.
What I'm wondering, I'm sorry, I'm like, now you got me really thinking. So the Spurs are the one team, other than the Pacers, are the one of 2 teams in the league left that has cap space, and they also happen to have your protected pick. is there some kind of 3-team construction where the Spurs are like, I don't know, they're taking on Fournier and they're giving up that pick and sending that pick to Charlotte, but maybe we're sending them a better draft asset, but I don't know what draft asset that would be. I don't know. Or maybe we're sending them a young, I don't know. I don't know what we're doing, but
yeah, just 3-team trades are so messy. They
are.
I guess, it's something that Andrew kind of brought up too, is just like, with Rozier being a shooting guard, like how does he fit? How would he fit within like the rotation of Brunson and RJ Barrett too? Like, obviously, would he come off the bench? Could you play?
I think
he play the 3 at 1, 2, 3.
My guess is that you know what? That's a really good question. It really does. I think a lot of it depends on, because I think I bet you they'd try to sell him on making a run at like 6th man of the year. Coming off the bench and starting Grimes as a little bit more of, because Grimes is less of an on-ball guy. I think Grimes gives you a lot of value on the defensive end, obviously, and then off the ball as a shooter.
Don, can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
You want to get nuts?
Yes, let's get nuts.
Let's get nuts. So you talked about the Knicks depth at guard, Richie. Well, you also said that the Hornets need a backup point guard, and we happen to have a guy that finished 3rd in 6th man of the year that Tom Thibodeau obviously swears by in Derrick Rose. There was also, as John mentioned, a guy that made more threes than anybody else in the sport after the was the turn of the year, John. So from January 1st
I see where you're going with this. So you're going Rozier and Hayward?
Rozier and Hayward for Derrick Rose, Fournier, and Randall. It matches on Trade Machine. And then you guys, there's your whole offseason. You went from not doing much to now depth to show LaMelo, hey, we're committed to this for the next couple of years. And then it's not even that much long-term money because Rozier and Randall is an exact 4 years for 4 years. Derrick Rose is an expiring contract because it's a team option, and Fournier becomes an expiring contract next summer.
So you guys actually say you might come out even, but in terms of next year, you're saving some money next year because
you're saying Evan Fournier. How many more years does Evan Fournier have?
It's 2 + 1. It's 2 years plus a team option. So next summer. It's that's the genius thing about the Knicks have done some things in the last couple of years that are questionable. What they haven't done questionably is how they've structured all of their contracts. They're either in descending order, so they get cheaper as the years go by, or the last year's always a team option. So like Randall's the only one that has a player option in his last year, but Evan Fournier is a 3 + 1, but Derrick Rose is a 2 + 1. That's why when they made the trade with Detroit on for Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel, those were 2-year contracts, but it's 1 plus a team option. So they end up being expiring contracts that they sent out.
Interesting. Yeah, that's deceiving when you look at it on the trade machine and just see like 2 years. Obviously the team options are nice to have with Rose and Fournier. I've always been a fan of Rose, like just like in the quick spurts that he comes on off the bench, like getting to the rim and stuff like that. Like there's been something that, just his story as well, like, obviously overcoming those injuries and still being somewhat of a productive player and filling that need as the backup point guard position. I do think that, obviously it's a 3-for-2 trade, which Hornets do have a spot for one more player. That's probably why they're waiting on their backup point guard. Who knows where they're going with that direction. So that would solve this. That's interesting. I just think, well, I guess Hayward's health would really be like the swing piece here, because if you can't guarantee anything, but if Hayward was healthy, obviously you'd be getting a very productive player out of him. And then Rozier and Randall, like you mentioned, like it's the 4 years for 4 years. So it's that is kind of like a even wash there. I just wonder with the Evan Fournier thing. I know you said it's a team option, but I just wonder if like the Hornets could maybe get like a second round pick out of this. But other than that seems pretty fair.
I wasn't even factoring in the pick compensation. I would probably have to factor in. I was just trying to make sure the money matches up. The other
possibility here, and the money difference would be significant. Is there's 3 players the Knicks are trying to unload. One of them is Julius Randle. I think Evan Fournier, I don't want to say they're trying to unload Evan Fournier, but Evan Fournier is the salary that they were going to send out in the Mitchell deal. So I would assume, sending him out is still something that they wouldn't mind doing. And then there's Cam Reddish, who is a guy who's just looking for some court time to, become the star that he thinks he is. And as people are slowly starting to realize now, there's no spot in the rotation for him here in New York. I don't necessarily know if there would be a rotation spot for him in Charlotte or any kind of a bigger role. But like, do you think he's a player that they might take a chance on as like kind of a young, guy who still has some upside theoretically?
Yeah, there's a couple players kind of down your roster a little bit that I've always kind of pinpointed, and that's always been Miles McBride and Cam Reddish. I'm not sure how willing you guys are to give up Miles McBride and good defender, but yeah, Cam Reddish definitely thinks highly of himself, and I think the Hornets, especially under Steve Clifford, could always use someone that is a force on the defensive side of the court. He's really never developed an offensive game at this point in his career. So I know that he's kind of like, does he just have 1 year left on his contract? So it'd almost be like a year in which he just kind of test himself here in Charlotte and see how well he can play.
He's in PJ's class. So yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Okay. So I definitely think that the Hornets would value a player like him, especially Clifford, just because of the things that he brings on the defensive side of the court. Obviously it does not solve the backup point guard issue, but maybe some kind of trade with Cam Reddish and Derrick Rose. What is that? 5.9 million and 14.
The money for the money for Hayward and Rozier for Randall, Rose and Reddish. I don't have a calculator. I'm doing a calculator. That I think that works because the thing about Randall is his outgoing salary is a little bit less than $4 million more. Or excuse me, his incoming salary is a little bit less than $4 million more than his outgoing salary because he has a trade kicker. Now, he could obviously waive his trade kicker, but the Knicks are paying that, but it does have to go on the cap for the team that is bringing him in. So I am fairly certain the money would work on that. And I bet, again, I know Tom Thibodeau would not love the idea of sending out Derrick Rose. But man, I think talk about a trade that would answer a lot of questions for the Knicks. I think that would do it.
I think I like that trade better than the one with Fournier in it. Cam Reddish, Randall, Rose for Hayward and Rozier. And Hayward also has a trade kicker, by the way, John. So,
okay.
Yeah. So does that just like even out in the wash there? So, yeah, I definitely would be considered, or that kind of be intriguing just to see what Cam Reddish can do here because he doesn't, like you said, he doesn't have a role. He's stuck behind so many players on the Knicks in terms of that guard and wing position. And Derrick Rose, like I said, keeps filling that spot as a backup secondary ball handler. And here's the deal, like Rozier last year, like I said, he did play some spot minutes as at the point guard. So he can be somewhat of a primary ball handler. He just gets in the habit sometimes of trying to score and instead of trying to facilitate. So it just depends on the system that he's put in and trying to get the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible.
So the reason that there is a large contingent of the fan base, and I just want to say, I don't think that they're nuts at all, who want Derrick Rose on a different team or just don't want Derrick Rose on this team, is because they want Emmanuel Quickley to get those backup point guard reps. Because again, after the Mitchell trade didn't go down, it's like the conversation we were having a few minutes ago with like, what the hell are we doing here? Well, at the very least, let's make sure that we give all of the young players on this team a chance to show whatever their ceilings might be this season. Like treat this season as a gap year. And I think giving Emmanuel Quickley a lot of reps as the backup point guard. So that's, I think, would be part of the incentive. I know it's an incentive for a lot of fans. I don't believe it is an incentive for the organization. I'd love to be proven wrong on that. But yeah, maybe it's funny when you brought up Rozier, and I don't think I considered him. I thought the Hornets would consider him. Not that I thought they consider him an asset, but that they would be more hesitant to get rid of him.
Yeah, I think the hardest part with trades with Hornets is that they have Rozier and Hayward who are on these like absurd contracts of like $25+ million a year. And then they've got a couple of expirings with Oubre and Plumlee who are great fillers for any type of trade. And they're pretty much productive players. They're average players. And then they got a bunch of young players that it would just take a lot to add up together to kind of match the salary. So when you said trades for Randall, my initial thought was Rozier just because the money's matched. But I think Mitch Kupchak really does value Terry Rozier within the organization. And he's one of those guys that he was extension eligible, but it didn't need to be done before the beginning of the season, but they went ahead and did it anyway. They could have let the season play out, see how he did, and go from there. But they were just so trusting of this guy. And I think that he's truly bought in to being a Charlotte Hornet. I think he's enjoyed kind of having a little bit more of that spotlight versus maybe if he was still on Boston or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're necessarily like ready to get rid of him. I do think that he was a little bit overpaid because I do think, not that he's a one-trick pony, but I do think he's limited in what he can do. But it was merely just the contract matching purposes that kind of drew my attention to him.
Makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm happy Andrew brought up the Rose possibility because it's not something I think that we've thought of a lot. I think when most people think like, okay, Charlotte needs a backup point guard, you figure, does Kemba make his way back there? Is that something that's been talked about at all? I'm just curious.
It is. Obviously, I think he's still with Detroit, so technically he's still not, it's not been bought out yet. I think it's down to Kemba, and I think it's down to, unless there's a trade, I think it's down to Kemba or Isaiah Thomas, who played obviously with the team last year. I think that continuity, that's my personal preference. If there's not a trade to be made, is Isaiah Thomas. I get that he's very undersized. I mean, so is Kemba. Kemba would be the awesome story coming back to Charlotte. I think he's going to retire a Hornet, but not necessarily. It doesn't have to be brought back this year if Isaiah Thomas is the better option, which in my view, I think Isaiah Thomas, just for the on-court purposes, I think a lot of people respect him inside the locker room. PJ Washington grew really close to Isaiah Thomas. Like he always talked about how, that was his vet, even though they're just different positions. So that probably says a lot about IT and just kind of the effect that he had on the team. And you could see him, standing up on the sidelines when he wasn't in the game and just kind of barking out orders and organizing the team. Like he bought into being that type of guy. So that's my preference. But I do like the storyline of Kemba coming back if he were to ever be bought out by Detroit.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, there were, like, Kemba got a raw deal here.
Yeah.
There were a lot of nights where, not a lot of nights, there were nights where Kemba, obviously it wasn't only the stretch where he won Eastern Conference Player of the Week, but like there were some other games sprinkled throughout the year where it wouldn't be for a whole game, but it would be for a quarter or two quarters. It was like, man, this is the Kemba Walker we remember. But I don't know if it's just that he couldn't muster it up physically to do it on a more consistent basis, or there were just internal dynamics that, he was not really given more of an opportunity, whatever it is. I feel bad for the way it went down for him here because he seems like a great guy.
His mom lives 2 doors down from my parents. So I'm hoping to kind of drive over there one day and just say, hey, what's up with Detroit? Is he getting bought out?
That's fantastic. I think that's it. I don't know that there's anything else. I guess we just start counting down the days until LaMelo watch, right? Because like it's fun because like one of our local beat guys brought up LaMelo's name recently as like, because there's always going to be a segment of people wondering where's the next star the Knicks are going to go chase after, and like, I think the rumblings that are down there will make their way up here, but yeah. We'll see.
I didn't mean to break anything. It's not necessarily like true by any means, but they're just, there's this like section of Twitter that's not necessarily Hornets fans, but they're LaMelo fans. And they're always wanting him to be in the best situation possible. And I think some of them don't see it here in Charlotte.
Twitter.
Yeah.
Lovely place. Yes.
Yeah. And it's so funny because like last thing we'll get out of here. Like, you guys were brought up in the Mitchell talks, as a possible team. And the thing that I immediately pointed out was like, because of that protected pick that you guys traded away to us on draft night, it like you didn't quite have the full access to the amount of, draft equity that I think it would have made it a really competitive offer. I wonder if that was for Kai Jones, right? If I recall correctly.
Yeah, I think a couple of years ago. Yes, you were correct.
I wonder if there's any buyer's remorse with that trade.
Yeah, they did. They definitely had some faith in him. I think he's a guy that just started playing basketball like 5 or 6 years ago. So he's got a lot of ways to go. But he's a freaky athlete. Like he can get off the floor. Like I think he's, he can jump real high, real quick. I don't know if it's like Olympic, measurements, but he is getting off the floor quick. He's just got to develop some of those skills. But yeah, it's crazy that they traded up to get him in that first round a couple of years ago.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. This was fun. Thank you for hearing me out on my pleas and for coming up with a really good fake trade. I'm down for that. I'm going to spend some more time thinking about this. Before we get out of here, can you let everybody listening know where to find you and find your stuff?
Very good. Yeah, like he mentioned in the beginning, I have a BuzzBeat Plus Substack, which you guys can subscribe to. It's mostly for ad-free podcasts, but I also put out the occasional Hornets piece. Me and my co-hosts, there's 3 of them. We kind of tackle like college prospects. So we've got a lot of different angles, kind of like what you guys do with Cap or No Cap and stuff like that. I really appreciate and admire what you guys do from afar. And I told you guys this, like, I have no affiliation to the Knicks, but you guys are one of the few team-oriented podcasts that I listen to just because of the quality and stuff. So we try to emulate you guys as much as possible, but I don't know if we'll ever get there. But yes, BuzzBeat Podcast. We put out podcasts once or twice a week, not on a daily basis, but definitely check us out.